You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and yes, a day late, but I'm coming to you all today with my picks for week number 2 of the UFL. Real life got in the way. Could not get my picks out yesterday, but I wanted to make sure I got them in as quickly as possible today for you all. So I invite you all to comment down below. Let me know. How'd you do in week 1? What are you expecting from week number 2 here in the UFL? I did not have a hot start to the season, started out 1-3, so hoping to maybe flip the script and get back to 500 here in week number 2. But starting with our first matchup here, we're going to be looking at the San Antonio Brahmas heading into Memphis to take on the Showboats. Both teams 1-0. This one's going to be at 12 p.m. on ESPN tomorrow. The San Antonio Brahmas coming in as a shock team out of week number 1, just completely exploding in absolute domination over the DC Defenders here. And the Showboats coming away with a gritty but a big victory for them as well to kick off the season 1-0 on their end. I think this game has game of the week potential written all over it. With San Antonio looking as good as they did coming out of week number 1, and the Showboats looking really strong, especially on the defensive side of things as well, with so much potential upside in their passing attack. This is a fun team to watch. Not to mention, you have the two most ferocious defensive lines going head-to-head after week number 1, both notching 4 sacks apiece. So we have 8 sacks combined between these two teams coming out of week 1. There is a lot to be excited about. Looking at the San Antonio Brahmas, I think coming into this game here, you really want to lean into the balance that you showed in week number 1. With 27 passes and 23 runs, that is exactly what you are looking for in terms of balance and stability within your offense. You're never leaning too much one way or the other. And Memphis proving to be a tough defense, having allowed just 132 yards passing with 4 sacks in week number 1. You don't want to have to feel like you need to rely on your quarterback to throw the football over and over and over again. And as I mentioned, quarterback Chase Garbers, all eyes will be on him coming into this matchup here to double down on his strong week 1 performance here, getting wide receiver Kirkland involved should be a priority for this team. He got 9 total targets last week, 8 receptions, 61 yards, and a touchdown. So expect to see more of that magic maybe hook up this week as well. On the defensive side of the ball, I do think keeping Memphis one-dimensional is going to be the key to success. They clearly struggled to run the football last week, and if you're able to shut down the run and bring that ferocious pass rush that is honestly now carried through 2 seasons because they had such a hot start in week 1 and they were one of the best pass rushing teams in the XFL last season, I think you have a really good shot at coming out victorious here. Meanwhile, when we flip over and we look at the Showboat side of things, I think for them, they really need to find a way to open things up for their running backs and really try to utilize the play action to get things going. I think there's a lot of potential upside with this offense as a whole, but I don't think you reach that full potential until you get the ground game going and force your defensive opponents to be honest and allow yourselves to both run and pass effectively and maybe get them to bite on some play action fakes and really see what you can do here with all the talent you have. So that being said, it will be easier said than done. Brahmas, of course, allowing only 43 yards on the ground, but it should be a task that they're trying to get done nonetheless. Offensively as well, I think protecting the football should be key for them here. 1 fumble, 1 interception last week here. San Antonio, as of week 1, does not look like a team that you want to be giving extra possessions to because they will clearly take advantage and put points on the board. So keeping the ball in your possession and not giving them an extra here or there should be of the utmost importance. And then on the defensive side of things, I think you just need to kind of let your pass rushers pin their ears back and go. Be aggressive, force Chase Garbers into maybe some uncomfortable situations, some uncomfortable throws. It was very clear with the way the defenders were really struggling to just create any kind of pressure against him. If you let him drop back and pass, he could wind up being very successful. And obviously there's enough talent on this Brahmas offense that he might be able to just slice and dice you up defensively if he gets going and that pressure's not there. So really getting after him, making him uncomfortable should be key. And with the Brahmas allowing only 1 sack last week and not really a ton of pressure on top of that, this is something that I think you really need to emphasize on the Showboat side of things. But as is for who I think comes out victorious in this one here, like I said, game of the week potential, I think this one's going to be decided very, very close. And defenses might run a little bit stronger in this one here and maybe slow down some of the offense. So I am looking at a slightly lower scoring game, but I have the San Antonio Brahmas going into Memphis, taking out the win and notching it 22-19 over the Memphis Showboats here. This is one that I kind of feel like goes to basically the winning defense. Whichever defense comes out hot initially and hangs on, I think winds up leading their team to victory here. So while there's a lot of offensive upside and potential in this one here, we have two very stout defenses and very aggressive defensive fronts that I think might wind up taking over this game. Going into game number 2, we are looking at the defending XFL champ Arlington Renegades taking on last year's XFL darlings in the St. Louis Battlehawks. Both teams 0-1 after falling short last week. For the Renegades here, defensively, I think it's very simple. You just have to tighten things up. Like, there's not one thing you can look at and go, yeah, maybe that needs to be improved more than anything else. I think you just need to tighten up defensively as a whole, especially when you see what happened to them in the second half. You need to be aggressive, and you need to stay aggressive, because the first half defense of Arlington looked strong and stout. It really came down to you let up a touchdown basically going into the second half, and then it just kind of fell apart from there. So if they can stay aggressive and look like the first half defense against the Birmingham Stallions, they absolutely have a shot against the Battlehawks offense that kind of fell flat on their face last week and didn't show up until the fourth quarter. On top of that, being aggressive as far as just going after the quarterback, maybe forcing him into some bad throws, that is what you're looking for here. With 2 interceptions in the first half last week, if we see more of that, but throughout the duration of the game here, Arlington definitely has a shot. I absolutely believe so. And then offensively, I think biggest thing that stood out to me and something that carries over into this week, the big men up front have to get going. You need to start strong and get the football going on the ground more aggressively this week here. Last week, your first run play out of the gate, -4 yards to kick things off on the ground, and that is not the direction you want to be going in on your very first run play. So the big men up front have to get going, have to beat the D-line to the punch, and get the ball moving on the ground for them. Avoid mistakes, no turnovers, or at least minimize the turnovers. An interception and a fumble, both inside of Birmingham's 25-yard line last week, were costly for Renegades, and I think they need to make sure they protect the football, and up front early, they need to get aggressive and really take it to the Battlehawks defensive line. On the flip side of things, looking at the Battlehawks here, offensively, passing attack quite simply just needs to get into a rhythm early on, and the offensive line just needs to be ready to go. First 3 passes last week went incomplete, sack, incomplete. And then for the first few drives, it was just like an incomplete show, or like your completions were good for like 3, 4, 5 yards at best. It wasn't really anything that was pushing your offense forward, and it was resulting in just, drives ending in 5 or 6 plays altogether, something very short, very quick, and you're punting the football away and giving it back to your opponent here. I definitely think you need to come out swinging. And on top of that, third down needs to be key for this team. The fact that you won the third down battle but still lost last week is not ideal. So being better than 5 of 15 on third down should help benefit your offense and even your defense on top of that, as well as you get into the later stages of the game. You must win on third down. That is one of the very simple things of football. Winning on third down is huge for teams in coming out victorious week in and week out. Defensively, I think one thing that I really look at here is just the defense overall needs to work, and this is more so like linebackers, and actually you could just throw the whole defense on here. I don't want to really call out any specific position group, because honestly, you just have to keep the football in front of you. When you look at how things went for them last week, they allowed 8 big plays for a whopping 207 total yards. Now, this was a stat that I found within the UFL stats site, and I've got to say, the UFL has done a phenomenal job with the way they do their stats. They have a litany of numbers for you to go through, and it's awesome being able to dive in and really kind of, you can pinpoint some really interesting numbers where you go, wow, if this team did a little bit better here or a little bit better there, we're maybe looking at a different outcome here. And when you're talking 8 big plays, 8 single plays that totaled 207 yards of offense for the Panthers, that's runs of 10 plus yards or more, or passes of 15 plus yards or more, you got yourselves a problem with keeping the ball in front of you on defense. Between that and just bringing some more pressure, you only really got 1 sack last week. If you can get Luis Perez off schedule, you have yourself a legitimate shot at winning here. But as for who I think comes out victorious, based off of performance from last week, the Battlehawks, they were in it to the very end, and I do think that they maybe found something out about themselves or figured something out offensively that they could maybe carry here into week 2, whereas the Arlington Renegades were just kind of left soul-searching, and I know the Birmingham Stallions are just such a great team with so much talent here, so maybe that was really the catalyst to what caused them to collapse in the second half, I don't necessarily know. It's too early to really tell, but I do think I like the St. Louis Battlehawks a little bit more in this one here, so I am going to go St. Louis for the win, and I have them winning 23-17. I'm a little bit concerned about what we got from Arlington last week, and I think we might see some more struggles from them going up against a Battlehawks team that lost to a 64-yard field goal to finish things off. Moving into day number 2 on Sunday, we got 2 more games to look at here, and the first one, we have the Birmingham Stallions heading into Michigan to take on the Panthers. Both teams 1-0. This one's going to be at noon on ESPN. Big questions coming into here. Can the Michigan Panthers double down and tell everyone that they have arrived against a top-tier opponent like the Birmingham Stallions? Or do the Birmingham Stallions come in and just continue their spring dominance here? So when you look at the Stallions, I think biggest thing for them, protect Matt Corral. Michigan's defensive front clearly littered with talent here, and even some of their best talent didn't make the most noise on the defensive line, and that's scary to think about. Brandon Speaks, pretty quiet considering just how good he's been in spring football the last few years. So definitely something that they need to work with. And especially when you consider Matt Corral's play early on, he was a little bit shaky. You want to make sure that there's not a ton of pressure in his face so he's not throwing into any bad coverages. On top of that, I think one way to really mitigate what we saw, which was a ferocious Michigan Panthers front going up against the Battlehawks last week, is getting the ball to your playmakers and allowing them to make plays, but doing so very quickly. You are littered with talent offensively over there in Birmingham. You have Deion Kane as a wide receiver, Jay Sternberger, running back CJ Marable, and now Ricky Person even looks like a phenomenal talent as well. You have so much to work with. Get the ball into their hands as quickly as possible and allow them to make those plays as the playmakers that they are for your offense. Let them do the work and don't force Matt Corral into some weird situations where he has to maybe put the ball in a tough spot here. On the defensive side of things, first and foremost, you have got to contain running back Wes Hills, averaging 7.7 yards per carry last week. If you don't know who Wes Hills is, you probably found out last week, and if you're still really unsure of was that production he had just kind of a one-time thing, go back and watch some USFL games from last year. He was an absolute force for the New Orleans Breakers, and he's going to probably continue to be so. That guy is a mountain of a human being, and on top of that, is fast as all hell. It makes no sense. He's massive and moves with the best of them. So containing Wes Hills has got to be the biggest priority. The second thing that I really think the Stallions should focus on here is EJ Perry and rattling him essentially. When you saw EJ Perry last week, he got into some situations where he was basically playing hero ball, and this is something he needs to stay away from. There is enough talent on this Panthers offense now that he doesn't need to make every single play for this team here. Like I just mentioned, Wes Hills, excellent running back. You have some studs at wide receiver as well, but he can create some opportunities with his legs. Knowing when to tuck and run and just maybe throw the football away as opposed to forcing it into certain coverages might be the best idea. He had a very up and down week, but it was 50-50, I would say. He had 2 rushing touchdowns on the ground that were massive for the Panthers, and on top of that, he also had a couple of interceptions, just not great throws altogether. So if you can go after EJ Perry and force him into those mistakes, I do think that the Stallions have an opportunity to really disrupt some things for the Michigan Panthers offense. Looking at the Panthers side of things, though, offensively, EJ Perry, as I just mentioned, he just has to play smarter. That really is what it comes down to. None of the hero ball, focus on short, quick passes, get the ball into the hands of your playmakers, and if you feel like you need to extend the play, extend it, and then just know when to tuck and run, or maybe just, take the ball, chuck it out of bounds. No one's going to take it away from you if it's heading over to the sideline into your coach's hands or something like that. But take care of the football. Don't feel like you need to force anything. That's probably the biggest thing here. If he can do that, this Michigan Panthers team is an absolute unit because they have a great defense and an offense last week, minus 2 interceptions, potentially almost dominates the St. Louis Battlehawks. So if you could protect the ball, I think the Panthers are in a really good spot here. And this on top of doing that, if he's playing smart and he's really creating problems against the defense, it's just going to continue to open things up for Wes Hills, who, again, continuing his dominance from last season into last week. This is a guy that he can not only run the football effectively, but let's see him get the football more through the passing game as well. He is an excellent receiver out of the backfield as well as being a running back out of the backfield. So let me see some more targets to Wes Hills. Get the ball in his hands more. He is a bona fide playmaker, and in only 8 games last season was arguably one of the most dominant players on offense, period, in the USFL. So let's see him get some balls, not just on the ground, but through the air as well. On the defensive side, this is a really tough one, and I think this is going to be something that defenses kind of have to grapple with every single week, and it's probably something I'm going to talk about more and more in depth as we really start to see who the true playmakers are in Birmingham. But you basically have to decide going into this game who you can afford to allow to make plays and who you cannot. There are just so many guys on the Birmingham Stallions offense that are going to be able to make plays against you defensively. So you basically have to choose like the 2 that you want to allow to maybe make a play or 2 here or there, and the 2 that you feel are the most necessary to lock down. And that's kind of how you're looking at it going into this game here. Ultimately, just how much you allow those guys that you allow to make some more plays will kind of determine how things shake out for you, but it's really going to come down to just forcing a lot of pressure, force Matt Corral into just bad decisions, and maybe, get him to look more like the first half as opposed to the second half, and maybe like the first quarter and some change before we saw Martinez come in and take over for a little bit before he got knocked out of the game. But you basically need to take your big men and just create havoc up front. I think that's the best way you can kind of establish some dominance against the Stallions offense, because in the first half you saw some struggles from Birmingham as they kind of got the ball rolling. It was not easy initially, and I think Arlington did a really good job of disrupting what they were doing and creating some pressure within the pocket. But once that pressure kind of faded away, then Birmingham really started to take over. Clearly Matt Corral got himself into a groove. He felt comfortable in the pocket. So if you can break down that pocket the way you did last week against the Battlehawks, you definitely have a shot. That being said, as for who I think comes out victorious in this one here, I'm going to come out and say it. I really have a hard time betting against Birmingham. I just think that they are such a good team from top to bottom, and picking against them is going to be very hard for me to do this season. I have them winning 24-18. I do think the Panthers have a chance to keep it close. I don't think they're going to get blown out by any means. Comes down to somewhere within a possession or so is ultimately what I'm looking at here. I think that defense is very formidable in Michigan, and it should create some problems for Birmingham, more than they saw against the Arlington Renegades, or at least for an extended period of time during that matchup. But altogether, I do think that it's going to be a Birmingham Stallions show once again as they move on to 2-0 and continue their dominance within spring football. And then finally, we have ourselves the Houston Roughnecks taking on the DC Defenders. This one going to be in DC. This will be at 4 p.m. Eastern time on Fox. And my biggest question, and this is for both teams coming into this matchup here, is going to be which offense truly comes to life this week and can help lead their team to their first victory of the season here. Both of these teams' offenses did not look great last week, whether it was mistakes, miscues, poor timing, just connections that were not landing the way they needed to be. You got a lot of just big mistakes, unfortunate things going on, ball bouncing, not bouncing the right way for teams kind of situation for both of these offenses here. So I really think whichever team figures it out offensively has a better shot of coming out victorious here. When I look at the Roughnecks, their biggest issue obviously was ball protection last week. And if everyone wasn't walking around the facility this week with a football in their freaking arm that plays on offense and didn't have people coming up around them just trying to slap the ball out of them, I don't know what you were doing all week, but that should have been something that you were doing every single day going throughout the week when you're not in the middle of practice. Beyond that, outside of the fumble issues, I think opening up the run will really help out what your offense can do. And obviously, Mark Thompson is not going to be playing again this week from everything that I've been seeing. He was not on the depth chart there. It looks like TJ Pledger is going to get the start this week, even though he tweeted out he thinks he should be able to play. He's not going to this week. And I think if you can at least establish some semblance of a solid run game, it'll open things up for Jarrett Guarantano, who honestly had a solid game, but didn't really blow anyone away. But I think if you have some threat of a running game, it could really allow him to open up the field a little bit more, maybe make some more riskier passes. I mean, he was really efficient, 16 of 21, 158 yards. You're averaging about 10 yards per completion, just no touchdowns, no interceptions, just a solid day. I would say, not conservative, but it wasn't risky by any means. It was just a solid, good job with the football there. And honestly, that's great. Going into week one, you don't necessarily know what you're going to get. By no means is that bad, but you want to be able to open things up so he can maybe take some risks with that football and make some big plays and really open things up for your offense. On the defensive side of things, realistically, I don't really think you have to do too much different for the Roughnecks here. They have some really good talent on the defensive side of the football, and in my notes here, I literally just put run it back. You had 3 sacks, 7 tackles for loss, an interception, 3 pass breakups, and a fumble recovery as a defense in total. 3 of your top 5 tacklers last week were cornerbacks. That is showing you not only just how great of a unit you have, but how physical of a defense you have altogether there. The fact that you have cornerbacks leading the way amongst your tacklers goes to show you just how much these guys are willing to get in there and get dirty, and I love that about a defense. When you have corners leading in tackles or being amongst the best in your team in notching tackles in games, you have yourself an aggressive unit in a team that offenses don't necessarily want to have to go up against. So I really like what the Houston Roughnecks did last week, and you just kind of want to focus on more of the same this week. Really sound football, keep everything in front of you, no massive plays by any means. Get after the football, bring down the ball runner, and take care of what you can take care of. On the defenders side of things, first and foremost, offensive line definitely needs to protect Jordan Ta'amu with 4 sacks allowed last week. Keeping the passing game a little bit shorter and quicker might help and aid with this. We're still very early on in the season, so it's hard to dictate which offensive lines are better than the rest, but 4 sacks in a game by no means is a great effort, so there is obviously the concern that maybe the offensive line isn't where they thought it might be coming into that first matchup here. So with that, keeping the passing game short and quick, allowing Ta'amu, who can be an efficient quarterback. I mean, despite all the troubles they dealt with, he still pushed over 200 yards passing. If you can just give him the opportunity to maybe get the ball out of his hands quicker, you might see less of that issue there, or you can at least help mitigate it, especially going up against a defense that was pretty aggressive last week in the Roughnecks here. And it's very clear this is not the same offense from last year, so you have to make up for some of those shortcomings. On top of that, I definitely need to see more of an effort to run the football. I know things were not going great on the ground, and the game kind of like got out of hand really quickly because, San Antonio came out opening drive, then the second drive right after, boom, boom, touchdown. So you're down quick and you want to keep pace, but don't just abandon the run. 13 attempts in 60 minutes is unacceptable. That is going to lead you into a situation where the defense knows what you're doing. They're going to be able to make plays as they did, and you need to be able to, you need to keep the defense guessing. You need to keep them honest. So don't just quit on the running game. You need to establish the run and force defenses to not only account for one half of the football game, but the other half of the football game on offense, which is passing the football and running the football. You cannot just, you can't just have defenses sitting on their heels every single play because they basically feel like they're not going to run the football on us right now. They have no reason. There's no reason for us to think that they're going to. You can't let defenses get into that because then they get comfortable and then they get into situations where they're just making plays, whether it's just breaking up passes, interceptions. The defensive line doesn't have to worry about anything, so they can just pin their ears back and go. So you want to be able to keep defenses honest. On top of that, secondary on the defensive side of things needs to tighten up, and that's like throughout. From top to from even, you could even say the linebackers dropping in coverage as well if you really want to get into the weeds of it. 74% completion percentage allowed, not good. 156 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, Chase Garbers looked phenomenal last week, and I think that in a piece of that, it had to do with just how poor the defense of the defenders looked last week. And for me, it's like, you are the defenders. Let's see some good defense. Tighten it up over there in DC. That's what I want to see. On top of that, do not let drives extend beyond the third down situation, because what we saw from them last week was just a defense that was winning on third downs and then just could not stop the trick plays and or third or fourth down conversion attempts that were going on. They allowed the Brahmas to go 3 of 4, but you were successful. A great third down defense last week, 1 for 8, but it was those fourth down tries that really got the best of them. Make sure your special teams is awake so we don't see a repeat of any sort of punt, fake touchdown pass to a center. Like, that's craziness, absolute craziness. Be ready for that. You need to be ready on fourth downs, because any other team that you go up against is going to look back at that game and be like, they might be sleeping going into fourth down here. Clearly, they're a good third down defense. They did a good job against the Brahmas, but they got caught sleeping 3 different times on fourth down last week. You've got to finish drives on third down, and if you get into that situation where the opposing team is going for it on fourth down, you need to be just as ready. You got to win fourth down attempts just as often as you do third down attempts. Otherwise, you're letting teams get comfortable and go into 4-down situations, and it's a lot harder to get an offense off the field when they're successfully converting through 4 downs of play as opposed to just 3 downs and a punt. So definitely need to be better there as well. As far as who I think comes out victorious in this one here, I could definitely see this game being a little bit of a lower scoring affair, in large part because I'm not necessarily sure where the Roughnecks are offensively. I feel like missing Mark Thompson is definitely hurting them, so that is something I'm considering in this as well. Whereas the DC Defenders offense did not spark a ton of hope for me going forward for them this season, and that's not to like knock anyone or anything like that, but again, this is a vastly different offense from last season over there in DC. Like, you're missing your top 2 wide receivers. Your running back is out for the season. Like, yes, you have Jordan Teamu, but there's a lot that changed from last year into this year. This is not the same DC Defenders team by any means offensively. And you're going up against a Roughnecks defense that, if the offense just helped them out last week, probably has an even better game than they did. And they were a force last week, and it was a grindy game for them to wind up losing. So I do think the game winds up being a little bit lower scoring because of that. And I have the Houston Roughnecks going into DC getting the victory here. I think it's going to be a gritty kind of game, teeth pull type of matchup. You're going to see a lot of rough and tough stuff going on at the line of scrimmage. I think it's going to be one of those games where, the casual fan might say it was boring, but I do think that defenses maybe win out a little bit more than you'd expect in this matchup here, and hence we get that lower scoring affair. So I've got Houston Roughnecks. That being said, those are my picks going into week number 2 of the UFL. I invite you all to jump into those comments down below. Let me know, how'd you do week 1? What do you expect from week number 2? Want to hear your thoughts and opinions on all of that and my picks as well. But as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.